Do we think district court judges should rubber stamp each action? There is a premise that is built into that is absurd. The president is the sole head of the executive branch. He's the only officer in the entire government that's elected by the entire American people.
In a fiery exchange that quickly turned into a televised masterclass on immigration law, Stephen Miller, former White House advisor and current legal firebrand, appeared on CNN to dismantle the use of euphemistic language surrounding immigration. From the moment host Pamela Brown referred to an illegal immigrant as an undocumented migrant, Miller took control of the conversation, pressing her to define terms accurately. He asserted that referring to someone in the country illegally as merely undocumented is a deliberate manipulation of language used to obscure legal facts and shift public sentiment.
Democracy cannot function. In fact, democracy does not exist at all if each action the president takes, foreign policy, diplomatic, military, national security, has to be individually approved.
Miller contended that these semantics serve political agendas rather than truth and are employed to transform issues of national security into humanitarian stories, which misleads the public and weakens enforcement narratives. Brown appeared taken aback by the challenge, attempting to clarify that the migrant in question, allegedly involved in an assassination threat, had been set up. But Miller maintained that legal status is the core issue, regardless of surrounding circumstances. The incident under discussion involved a migrant accused of threatening to assassinate the president, a situation Brown quickly framed as a potential setup. Yet Miller redirected the focus back to the immigrant's legal status, underscoring that even if the individual was a victim of a frame-up, the fact remains that he was unlawfully present in the United States.
By 700 district court judges? That's democracy? A district court judge has no authority in this space whatsoever. Not even a little bit. Not even a small amount, let alone it is true. So answer me this, why did Congress create Article 2 immigration courts?
He emphasized the danger posed by allowing individuals to remain in the country illegally, especially those involved in criminal investigations, and stressed that their presence should be swiftly addressed through enforcement, not softened by political narratives. Brown pushed back with claims that law enforcement believed the immigrant had been treated unfairly, but Miller countered that public safety and lawful immigration procedures must come first, especially when threats against national leaders are involved. This difference in framing the issue, setup versus status, became a central point in the interview, revealing deep divides in how the political left and right address immigration policy. Throughout the segment, Miller accused CNN and similar media outlets of intentionally engaging in narrative manipulation by substituting legally precise terminology with emotionally neutral or positive-sounding alternatives. He argued that terms like undocumented migrant are employed to generate public sympathy and blur the distinction between legal and illegal immigration.
Because they didn't want Article 3 courts, and in fact prohibited Article 3 courts from adjudicating individual cases. Okay. Is it really your belief? As if it is, that's breathtaking to me, that when we're deporting an illegal alien, we have to get permission from an Article 3 district court judge?
This, Miller claimed, was part of a broader strategy to promote open borders under the guise of compassion. By referring to illegal entrants as undocumented, the media downplays the seriousness of violating U.S. immigration laws and subtly implies that these individuals are merely victims of bureaucracy rather than participants in a legal infraction. Miller emphasized that such linguistic games are not neutral or benign. They are calculated and serve to erode public understanding of the rule of law. The CNN host attempted to pivot the discussion away from terminology, but the damage was done. The spotlight on media bias and euphemistic framing was now blinding. The conversation then pivoted to the role of the judiciary in immigration enforcement, with Brown posing a question about checks and balances and whether judges should rubber stamp executive policies. Miller responded with an impassioned explanation of constitutional roles, asserting that district court judges are not meant to serve as a veto mechanism for the executive branch. He explained that when Americans elect a president, they are placing trust in that individual to make decisions on behalf of the country.
Okay,
like a trial judge? Is that your view?
It's how the law works and the Constitution works.
No, the law says explicitly that individual immigration cases fall underneath the Attorney General of the United States under Article 2.
Not expecting each policy to be pre-approved by unelected officials, Miller called out what he saw as a fundamental flaw in Brown's question: the assumption that the judiciary should oversee and potentially obstruct every executive action, an idea he described as absurd and damaging to the functioning of democracy. His position was clear: while judicial oversight exists, it was never intended to serve as a day-to-day gatekeeper for lawful presidential authority. Miller doubled down on his defense of executive power, reminding viewers that the president is the sole elected official responsible for the entire executive branch, and thus must be empowered to make and enforce policy without being micromanaged by lower courts. He argued that the premise of Brown's line of questioning, suggesting that judicial approval is necessary for every decision, was a dangerous distortion of how the U.S. government is designed to function. Miller pointed out that democracy becomes paralyzed if 700 judges across the country can freeze or override national security measures, foreign policy moves, or immigration enforcement. This, he stated, is not how checks and balances were intended to operate. Rather than protecting democracy, he warned, such judicial activism transforms the judiciary into an unelected super legislature.
This is an undocumented immigrant. I do want to note that, but this was someone who came forward, was a victim of a crime, and now law enforcement believes he was set up. Go ahead.
I'm assuming they have a fake ID. I'm assuming they have a fake social security number.
That's neither here nor there. That's getting away from the question, Stephen. I want this to be, and call me naive, a good faith discussion about what's happening right now.
Effectively nullifying the electoral process and the president's constitutional mandate. The issue of so-called activist judges then took center stage, with Miller lambasting what he described as a pattern of judicial obstructionism targeting the Trump administration. He noted that nearly half of all nationwide injunctions issued against presidents since 1963 were aimed at Trump's policies, a statistic he said was too consistent to be coincidental. Miller contended that these judges were not neutral arbiters of the law, but political actors using the courtroom to derail the administration's immigration agenda. He gave specific examples, including Judge James Boasberg's decision to halt the deportation of Venezuelan gang members on due process grounds, framing it as another instance of prioritizing ideology over public safety. According to Miller, these rulings repeatedly undermined attempts to restore immigration order, making it clear that the legal system was being used as a tool to resist elected authority rather than uphold the Constitution. As the debate intensified, Miller took direct aim at the legal misunderstandings surrounding immigration court jurisdiction.
When we use language that's designed to obscure the truth, that's not good faith. An illegal alien is an illegal alien. They're not an undocumented migrant.
Okay, that's fine. That's another discussion for another date.
I don't know the details of the assassination threat.
He explained that Article 2 of the Constitution grants immigration enforcement power to the executive branch and the Attorney General, not the judiciary. He elaborated that Congress created separate Article 1 immigration courts specifically to prevent Article 3 federal judges from presiding over individual deportation cases. When Brown suggested otherwise, Miller appeared incredulous, challenging her on the basic structure of immigration law. He asserted that expecting trial-level district court judges to approve or deny deportation orders is legally incorrect and constitutionally unfounded. Miller's explanation was rooted in legislative intent and judicial precedent, and he emphasized that immigration law is unique in its delegated powers, a distinction that the media and many judges conveniently ignore in their broader resistance to enforcement. In one of the most revealing parts of the interview, Brown brought up temporary protected status, TPS, and claimed not all immigration issues are outside the judiciary's reach. Miller acknowledged that nuance, but swiftly pointed out that the Supreme Court had already ruled in favor of the Trump administration on multiple immigration matters, including TPS. He emphasized that the court had upheld the executive's authority to determine immigration outcomes, and that this should settle the matter. Despite Brown's attempts to challenge this point, she ultimately conceded the legal validity of Miller's argument, showing that even the most determined opposition cannot dismiss binding precedent. This rare moment of agreement highlighted how Miller's command of legal detail rendered CNN's framing ineffective, further exposing the gap between public messaging and constitutional mechanics.
All I can say, based on what you're telling me, is there's an illegal alien in our country who's making menacing threats. Regardless of the facts or circumstances, we don't want him here. We're going to get to the bottom of it, and I would gladly come back on when I have more information to share with you.
They were set up, just to be clear. But quickly, where is the White House on habeas corpus?
The illegal alien was treated unfairly. Yes, I'm sure the illegal alien was treated very unfairly.
NERC News framed the entire segment as a failed ambush by CNN that backfired spectacularly. Rather than catching Miller off guard, the network handed him a golden opportunity to deconstruct their narrative and reinforce the constitutional limits of judicial authority. The interview, initially posed as a gotcha moment to challenge the Trump administration, instead became a public rebuke of the media's overreach and selective framing. According to the channel, Miller's calm demeanor and precise legal rebuttals left Brown speechless and CNN scrambling to control the optics of a conversation they initiated but could not steer. In this framing, CNN's failure was not just tactical, it was emblematic of a broader trend where ideological agendas collapse when confronted with constitutional facts and a guest prepared to defend them without apology. The segment closed with Miller summarizing the constitutional principle at the heart of his argument. Article 2 places immigration enforcement squarely in the hands of the executive branch, and any attempt by activist judges to override that authority represents a fundamental distortion of American democracy. He reiterated that the courts have a role, but not one that allows them to override every single enforcement action with ideological bias. bias. When CNN invited Miller, they expected to score political points, but instead aired a sobering civics lesson on separation of powers and the dangers of judicial activism. According to NERC News, this was yet another instance where constitutional clarity outshined media spin, and where inviting a legally competent voice exposed the fragility of modern media narratives.